We've got tons of PC gaming hardware news for you guys today, but I also want to talk a bit about software trends. This is an interesting piece of research from the Video Game Insights research here. And I'll be honest and say I don't know all about their methodology and all of that. But I want to just start out with this because I think this is a very positive sign, and I hope gaming company, executives look at this very carefully. The analysis here says the best performing games of 2023, and to be clear, this is PC games research. They look at a lot of Steam sales stats and things like that. Anyway, the best performing games of 2023 tended to focus on quality, lack of microtransactions, and creativity coming from small teams. On this side of the screen, we're seeing the top 2023 releases by units sold, and on the right-hand side, we're looking at the top 2023 releases by full game revenue. The lists are not exactly identical, but it looks like 7 out of 10 appear in both, and they're noticing that only 2 of these are free-to-play microtransaction machines, but that they're mostly what we're seeing on this list are great quality games with no microtransactions dominating the top releases, and 4 of the games are developed by very small indie teams. So interesting stuff here, and again, I really hope that Baldur's Gate 3 is kind of a wake-up call maybe for the industry, that there is another way to make money in PC gaming. You don't have to just, like I said, release some kind of microtransaction machine live service game. There's another option. Make a detailed, high-quality game. And then people will buy that because it's good. Anyway, and you do see Baldur's Gate 3 topping the charts. Now, they do have some estimated dollar figures if we want to attach those to these. I think that's down here. Where, again, now to be clear, this is PC gaming, not gaming in general. But if you take a look at these numbers here, they've got Baldur's Gate 3 at an estimated $657 million in 2023, versus something like, Hogwarts Legacy even coming in at $341 million, Resident Evil 4 coming in at $159 million. Starfield, to be fair, was, bundled into Game Pass, so a lot of people might have played it there rather than buying it on Steam, so, that's certainly something that could be factoring into Starfield, but even Starfield, again, these top games here, if we take a look at them, these are not those, microtransaction machines. It's interesting, and I hope that this has something to do, has some sort of an effect on the overall industry. Because, I think people have rightfully complained about a lot of what we've been getting for the last few years. On a bit of a related note, just with Starfield, I might as well mention that apparently Starfield's biggest patch yet is supposed to drop soon with a bunch of fixes, which includes some fixes to improved lighting and faces, as well as quest fixes and a whole bunch of other stuff. It looks like that'll be entering a beta branch on Steam very, very soon. And then, that will eventually follow into a mainline release. By the way, all my sources will be linked in the video description today. But I think this will be today's main story. The 4070 Super has had benchmarks leak, and they are showing an 18% gain over the RTX 4070. Now let's talk about this. First of all, what is the leak? This is 3DMark scores, which is synthetic tests, not an actual gaming test. Now, what does that mean? Well, one thing that it means is that usually I've found that these are best for comparing GPUs within the same architecture family. So like comparing a 4070 to a 4070 Super, this actually would probably give a lot of insight into the performance to expect. Whereas if you're comparing against like an AMD GPU, sometimes they perform differently in these synthetic benchmarks than they do in actual gaming workloads relative to, the scores they get in the synthetic benchmarks, or even to other generations of Nvidia GPUs like the 30 series, things like that. So do keep in mind what we are looking at here. Also take into account the fact that this is leaked information, because the review embargo does not lift until tomorrow. Now, as far as where is the source of this information, I'm going through this, and usually videocards.com will cite their sources, and I'm not seeing one here. So my guess would be that, they've done this in the past before other GPU releases in a similar manner. and the data has usually been good. I can't remember it ever being completely different than what we saw the next day when we got actual GPUs launched. So I would say that I would put high credibility in this source. But anyway, we're looking at synthetic numbers. Now, why that 18% number is kind of interesting, though. And that's because the super version of the card will have 22% more cores than the non-super card. So why wouldn't we get 22% more performance? Well, the number of cores is not the only thing that goes into the performance of a graphics card. And these do have the same memory subsystem. They have the same 12 gigabytes of VRAM. I believe they have the same speed VRAM, the same bandwidth, all of that. So you're not getting an increase to that aspect of performance. And also, I don't believe the power consumption is going up by 22%, at least on the non-overclocked models, like the Founders Edition, etc. And so with that in mind, to take full advantage of that additional cores, maybe overclocking beyond the power limits, maybe could get you more of that. Again, if this number even ends up being accurate. We also get a nice look at the 4070 Super Founders Edition here. I really like the look of the Founders Edition GPUs. They're not so gamery. I know some people want the gamery stuff and all the RGB and everything, but I just really like the sleekness of these designs. I wish more of the AIB partners for both AMD and Nvidia took a look at that style of design. Maybe we had some less gamery stuff out there. Anyway, so are we going to get exactly 18%? This is just one synthetic benchmark leaked early, so read into that what you will. Now, what else do we have it up against? And by the way, this is not just one of the 3D Mark tests. It looks like we have Speedway, Port Royal, TimeSpy Extreme, Firestrike, Firestrike Extreme, and Firestrike Ultra. And we can see the 4070 Super leaked score in purple on each of these lines if you'd like to compare it to maybe you run these tests on your own system and want to see how it stacks up. What videocards.com is giving us is the scores versus the 4070 Ti non-super, which, keep in mind, was until recently selling for almost $800 and did have an $800 MSRP. And against the 4070 non-super, which again was originally a $600 card like the 4070 Super, although when the 7800 XT from AMD came out and provided a lot of competition at the $500 price point, that forced the price of the 4070 down to about $550, and that has now been adjusted to be its official MSRP. So there's a $50 price gap between these. And we can look at how it stacks up against, the competition here. They're setting the baseline as the 4070 Ti performance at 100% here. So when you look at these percentage numbers, I am a math teacher, and I do notice a lot of people misunderstand percentages when I teach them. So percent in and of itself doesn't mean much. It needs to be a percent of something. So these percents are percents of the performance of the 4070 Ti, but the performance of the 4070 Ti is not the same thing as the performance of the 4070. So the percentage gap between, the 4070 Super and the 4070, if you just add, if you just subtract the difference here, that's not the same thing as getting the performance difference between them as a percentage, because you're using the 4070 Ti as the baseline. You would want to divide the actual raw performance number by the raw performance number between the two GPUs that you are actually directly comparing to get the exact correct amount. Now, that doesn't matter too much when the numbers are close, but it matters more the further apart they are, because then, again, the percent of that total value is different. Now, the videocards.com article does nicely kind of sum this up as basically saying the 4070 Super is 7% slower than a 4070 Ti, and 18% faster than a 4070 in these tests on average. And they're saying that the Super model is 15 to 19% faster than the 4070 and 8 to 5% slower than the Ti version. So basically, the numbers range from 15% to 19% faster than the 4070 non-Super, with an 18% average in this data set. And again, compared to the 4070 Ti, it ranges between 5% slower and 8% slower with a 7% average. Now, that's interesting because then you could do some, price to performance calculations and things like that. So let's start with this. So Basically, how about the 4070 Super versus the 4070? That is a $50 price gap if we divide their MSRPs. It's basically 9% more money to buy the Super version, assuming the cards are actually available at their MSRPs. Now, do we have any information about them being available at their MSRPs? Well, for example, if you go to like Best Buy right now, you can actually search for the Super cards, and some of them are actually listed as coming soon with their price tags. So we do have the Founders Edition, which should list at its $599, and we also see Gigabyte with the Super Windforce at MSRP. But then past that, we see $10 more for like the MSI Ventus 2X, and then $30 above MSRP for the Ventus 3X, $50 above MSRP for the Gaming X Slim, and that's what we see at Best Buy for the Super cards that are at least listed currently. So it does look like some models should be available at MSRP, but again, we'd hope they stay in stock, readily available at those prices, because as they sell out, if you're up to more $650 or more, that changes the math here a little bit, right? Because when we compare MSRPs, it looks like the Super card is offering a very good uplift here. If it was offering 15 to 19% more performance for 9% more money, that is a better value than the 4070 non-Super. If you start looking at, like, you know, $630 versus the $630, now you're about 15% more expensive for 15 to 19% more performance going by this leaked amount. So then it's suddenly about the same price to performance as the non-Super card. So again, that's something to take a look at. Now, another thing to think about is that this also then is getting fairly close to the performance of the 4070 Ti non-Super, which was also a 12 gigabyte card, and will be now being phased out. Once these things sell out their current stock, they are end of life. The 4070 Ti will be replaced by a Super version of itself that will have 16 gigabytes of VRAM and all that. Well, the 4070 Ti, it looks like this 4070 Super, it's not as fast, and you wouldn't expect it to be because it's not the full GPU die the way the 4070 Ti was, but it's pretty dang close. I mean, if you're within 5 to 8%, which is the differences that we're seeing here, that's pretty interesting, because if you do look at like 600 out of 800, you're basically at 75% of the original MSRP of the 4070 Ti, but getting within, it looks like by these numbers, 5 to 8% of its performance. So it's getting you something similar to a 4070 Ti for a much reduced price tag. I'm also very interested in what this will mean for AMD and their pricing. This is going to be another light-colored screen, so sorry for the flashbang here. But if we go to something like the relative performance chart from Tech PowerUp, where, again, different games, and especially if you're using ray tracing, different resolutions, if you spill over VRAM, there's all sorts of complications that make these numbers not exact, but, you know, for every situation. But they allow you to click on any GPU out there and set it as a baseline and get a pretty good ballpark figure for how they stack up performance-wise against each other. Again, individual games can vary wildly from these figures, but this is a decent ballpark figure for averages. Anyway, if we take a look at this, that means that, you know, the 4070, if we will kind of be up here around, it looks like, you know, it depends on which way you look at it, reducing the 4070 Ti or boosting off the 4070. Either way you look at it, you're somewhere close to 3090-ish levels of performance if we go off of these leaked numbers, which is at least interesting. And then where does that put AMD? Because cards like their 7900 XT are currently offered for around $800. Now, you would still, judging by these numbers, you would still expect this card to outperform the 4070 Super, because this card is, at least when you're not ray tracing, faster than a 4070 Ti, and then we're expecting the 4070 Super to be a bit slower than a 4070 Ti. But it does mean you're getting closer to that performance for a lot less money than was happening previously. So I'm just curious what will happen there. And then as we get into the 4070 Ti Super, which we're not seeing leaked numbers for today though, It'll close some of the gap in VRAM capacity as well and come in near that $800 price point. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some movement in pricing, but I'm hoping the movement is pushing current values down rather than the cards that we're seeing the Super Series actually just costing more than previously expected. Now we can look at a little bit more of the pricing of these GPUs as listed at Best Buy. So for example, the 4070 Ti Super, which again should MSRP at $799 according to Nvidia. Well, if I look at Best Buy, for one thing, there's no Founders Edition listed, and as far as I can tell from what we got out of CES, there won't be a Founders Edition, and there was no Founders Edition of the 4070 Ti either. Anyway, if there's no Founders Edition to come in at that promised MSRP, will there be any coming in at the promised MSRP? For example, we're seeing that the cheapest 4070 Ti Super listed at Best Buy as $850, which is $50 above the MSRP. So these cards become less exciting the further above that $800 price point they go. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. We see one listed here for $100 above the promised MSRP. And then we do see the 4080 Super, which will have a Founders Edition coming in at the promised $1,000. But then you instantly see the next one being $100 more than that for the 4080 Super. And again, that's just what's listed currently on Best Buy. Hopefully we will get more models available at those MSRP pricing. I'm also hoping that the 4080 Super Founders Edition acts as a price ceiling for how bad the 4070 Ti Supers can get, because there shouldn't be any reason to pay as much money for a 4070 Ti Super as you could for a 4080 Super if you have that model kind of holding the line there. We'll have to see what availability looks like and all of that. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on with the video for some other thoughts. Although I will say some other thoughts. I did publish a video yesterday comparing the 4070 non-Super versus the 7800 XT in a lot of the newest games. So again, if we did scale up from the 4070 by 15 to 19% was the numbers we're getting off of this leak, then you could take that into account and kind of look at how you would expect it to maybe perform versus something like a 7800 XT, where often when you're not ray tracing, the 7800 XT did have a noticeable, if not huge, performance advantage. Well, if we do bump that up, great. Although again, it's also coming with a price increase, so then that factors into everything. Overall, the 7800 XT should be a $500 GPU, although currently they've been selling above that frequently. And so I'm hoping that this 4070 Super also acts as a bit of a enforcer on the pricing on the 7800 XT, because given those numbers, it looks like the 4070 Super, other than having less VRAM, should be a better performer than the 7800 XT in most situations. Now it does, at MSRP, cost $100 more, which is a 20% price increase, but hopefully that at least puts a ceiling on how expensive those 7800 XTs can get, and maybe would force them back closer to that $500 MSRP or even lower. That would be nice to see. Anyway, let's move on with some other thoughts, because another thought is Nvidia is making massive money on the AI boom. We're seeing news now of a $500 million order of AI GPUs from India and things like that. So I'm hopeful that Nvidia will keep these prices in check on their gaming GPUs, but it's hard to see their motivation to do so when they can basically print money with AI GPUs using the same silicon. So it's, I don't know, we'll have to see what happens with pricing. That's my biggest question mark on the Super Series cards for now. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on with the 4090D. So the 4090D should be finally kind of debuting in China, either now or soon-ish, and we're starting to see some tests for it. If you've missed the info, basically 4090s can't be sold in China anymore due to US restrictions on AI, on a certain level of power for AI GPUs. So the 4090D is a cut-down version of it, but the question was, how much cut-down is it? And this is for that Chinese region. We are now seeing reports of a test showing it being about 6% slower than the 4090 in that first test, and having limited overclocking support. They do need to be careful to stay within those restricted numbers. This is also, I'm most interested in what does this mean for 4090 pricing elsewhere in the world, because a bunch of supply had been forced over to China before those restrictions hit. And so the 4090D actually getting availability in China should hopefully help stabilize supply throughout the rest of the world. And I have been monitoring that the 4090 Founders Edition and some others has been popping up in stock on Nvidia's website at MSRP several times over the last week. It has often sold out quickly, but previously we've been seeing 4090s basically out of stock below $2,000 constantly. So it does seem like we might be starting to see some movement stabilizing 4090 pricing, and that could have something to do with this 4090D. In other NVIDIA GPU news, we are seeing the RTX 3050 6GB version. Remember, the normal version is an 8GB card, but we have seen rumors that a 6GB card is incoming. We are now getting more rumored specs for it at 2,304 CUDA cores and a 70-watt TDP. This will make it significantly weaker than the 8GB version, but the 70-watt TDP does make it interesting in the possibility of not requiring external power connectors. And we've even seen one passively cooled version hinted at in a product listing. So overall, this videocards.com article has helpfully summarized the cuts to the 8GB version of the 3050, and the 8GB 3050 is already not very powerful and doesn't stack up very well against cards from AMD like the RX 6600. This is apparently losing 10% CUDA cores, 25% of VRAM, 25% of memory bandwidth, and between 32% of the base clocks and 17% of the boost clocks, and losing 46% of the TDP. And again, the only good news there being that TDP number, possibly making some interesting use cases of not needing that power connector and passive cooling and things like that. So interesting, we'll see what happens with that. Moving on to some AMD news, it's looking like we are seeing reports of their next generation Zen 5 processors, codenamed Granite Ridge, to be reportedly enter mass production, or have already entered mass production, and could be coming to AM5 later this year. We're seeing a number of reports about this. This is a WCCF Tech article. One thing they have is from Kepler, who is a well-known... So by the way, if you hear a bunch of noise, it sounds like my kids are rolling a ball around on our wood floors directly above me where I'm recording here. So anyway, that's just the kind of fun stuff you get on the channel here. Anyway, so we did have the question to Kepler, who is a well-known hardware leaker, especially with AMD products, saying, is Granite Ridge already in mass production? And the reply is, yeah, already in mass production. Now, as far as when we would get it, whether it would be Q3 or Q4, we don't know yet, and we also don't know performance numbers or anything. We'll have to see what happens. Also, good news is that that should be socket compatible with our current AM5 platform, as support for that has been promised through 2025 plus. What that plus means, we'll have to see. Now, AMD, don't confuse this generation we're talking about here with the 8000 series processors that AMD just announced. The 8000G series isn't their next generation of processors. I know that's confusing because it has an 8 instead of a 7, so if you don't pay careful attention, you might not understand what's going on here. The 8000G is, the G is standing for graphics. So while the 7000 series has an integrated GPU to get display output, it's not powerful enough to really do anything very useful. Whereas the 8000G series has a much stronger integrated graphics processor. It's basically, can go up as high as like a 780M, which I've tested out on the channel in like mini PCs and things like that. And it can actually do decent gaming performance, for an integrated graphics processor. But the 8000 series as a CPU will actually have cuts compared to the 7000 series in performance. So don't think of this as like your next-gen gaming CPUs. However, we do have reports that AMD is still recommending dual-channel DDR5 6000 memory as the sweet spot for this CPU generation. And also, they are emphasizing that it's even more important to have dual channel and fast memory if you're planning on using that APU. And really, the only reason to buy these would be if you're planning to use that APU. Otherwise, it seems like the 7000 series would probably make more sense. They're emphasizing that dual channel is an absolute must because of the huge bandwidth advantage for the APU, because the APU graphics will be using your system memory. That's absolutely huge. So anyway, it looks like AMD is still recommending that. That was also their recommended sweet spot for their 7000 series CPUs. Last thing I want to mention is a little bit more gaming handheld news. We've seen MSI's Claw gathering a lot of attention as being one of the first Intel Arc integrated GPU type systems to compete with the abundance of AMD-based systems out there, which is pretty interesting. Now, IGN has an interview with MSI where they ask a bit about this. And they do ask about things like an OLED display and things like that. But one of the things I found interesting was overall like long-term support, which was, so I'll link this whole thing. Like the length of the video is making me, I'm not going to report on everything in here, but again, follow links in the video description. But they are talking about how many years do you expect to support this MSI Claw? Is there a possibility you guys may release upgrades, things like that? And they're saying like they would expect 2 or 3 years of support with probably a version 2, version 3, version 4 down the road. Basically, as there are better CPU and GPU combos available, we would assume they're probably still talking about Intel chips, but we'll have to see. And so that's definitely at least interesting on that follow-up. But we're also getting news of another gaming handheld based on Intel's Core Ultra 7 155H. But this one's a bit different. This is coming from OneXPlayer. This is their X1. And this one is more like a tablet where with a larger screen. This is a, what was it, a 10.95 inch screen, so basically an 11 inch 120 hertz screen. And the controllers are detachable. And you can also like attach things like a keyboard. So this feels a little bit more like a laptop tablet crossover that can kind of also attach the joysticks on the ends for controllers. So certainly an interesting looking device. And again, also coming with that Intel Core Ultra 155. So we'll have to see how that does performance-wise. And then in other handheld news, this one's a bit different. We're seeing tweeted here by Retro Handhelds that apparently Atari is releasing a gaming handheld, but don't expect this one to be like SteamOS or Windows necessarily. This one is all about Atari emulation, and it comes with the little like trackball. That's what we call it. Right? I was called a roller ball. The little trackball, a D-pad, and one of the little the little rotating paddle-y thing that they had on the old Atari systems. Got some buttons over here as well. So looks like it could be an interesting system, and I believe pricing should be a lot lower on something like this compared to one of the full-on little handheld gaming PCs. And I'll end with a little bit more on that as kind of a follow-up. I in my last news video, reported on AYANEO Next Lite coming with some version of SteamOS because that is what they claimed in their marketing. But I also read into it and said that it looks like it's something called Hollow ISO, which I at the time reported in the video as like, I'm not a Linux expert, but that sounds like that might not be official Steam Deck. And I just want to confirm that is not official SteamOS. That's kind of a separate fork rather than like a Valve supported thing. So that certainly dampens my excitement for this device considerably compared to if it had been the first one to get official SteamOS support besides the Steam Deck. Anyway, hopefully you guys found the information in today's video useful and or interesting. Look out for benchmarks tomorrow to see if we can corroborate what the leaked numbers are here. And huge thank you to subscribers, viewers, and especially channel members who click the join button to help fund the channel directly, which is just absolutely amazing. And I hope everyone has an excellent day.